What is going on, y'all? Welcome back to another episode of the Playmakers Corner podcast. This is Gino Vigil, and I am your host of this episode of our 2024 season preview series. For those of you that don't know how this series works, myself, Coach V, Cody, and Gideon will be previewing every single 11-man football team, 1A through 5A in the state of Colorado. We'll be talking about the previous season, the playoffs, and if our prediction was right or wrong, some key departures, whether by graduation or transfer, some key playmakers that we think will be making the most impact on this upcoming season, and then finally, we will be predicting each team's overall record for the 2024 season, along with a window of wins that we believe each team will fall into. We will, of course, be doing our absolute best on these predictions with the information we have, whether it be from Max Preps, Huddle, social media, etc. Make sure to check out Coach V, Cody, and Gideon's season previews as well. I have 15 teams that I will be covering today, ranging from Grand Junction to the Denver metro area to Parker and all the way over to Elizabeth. And like I said, I will be giving each team an exact record prediction along with a window of wins to give those teams a ballpark of where I think they will be at record-wise here for the 2024 season. Out of the 15 teams I will be covering today, which are Elizabeth, Adams City, Gateway, Thornton, Grand Junction, Centaurus, Grand Junction Central, Highlands Ranch, Golden, Ponderosa, Castleview, Chaparral, Douglas County, Legend, and Regis Jesuit. So out of those 15 teams, 10 of them fell into our window of wins that we gave them last year, and that is pretty dang good. A couple were one game off from that ballpark, and then a couple completely exceeded or fell below those expectations. With that all being said, folks, let's go ahead and jump into our first team here that we will be talking about. It is the Elizabeth Cardinals out of the 2A East League. The Cardinals finished with an 8-1 regular season record with a 4-1 record in league games. They had a point differential of 359 points for versus on 111 points against. It was a very successful regular season for the Cardinals. Head coach Michael Zosh is returning as head coach of the Cardinals in 2024. And yeah, let's go ahead and talk about our prediction for the Cardinals last year and just how the season went. The Cardinals, as expected, had a very good regular season with only one loss to a very good Kent Denver squad. We had their window of wins to be 8 to 9 wins, and they were right in there with 8 wins, and they had a top seed in the playoffs. The Cardinals had a top 10 scoring offense and defense to make a very well-rounded squad. They got upset in the first round for the second year in a row last season, though. This time by a very tough Moffat County squad in a thriller that I personally got to witness in person, which was really probably the best game I saw all of last year. Not for the Cardinals, though, obviously. You know, Moffat County is a tough team to face in the first round. I know that pretty much everyone who was paying attention knew that that is a extremely tough matchup, especially in the first round. So, you know, I wouldn't blame the Cardinals too much for that loss. But let's go ahead and talk about some key departures here. We got the running back / middle linebacker Cooper Connolly, who was arguably the heart of this team on both offense and defense, as he put up nearly 1,000 yards and 12 touchdowns on 8.7 yards per carry on the ground, while also adding 71 tackles and 8 tackles for loss on defense. Connolly is a 6'3" beast, headed to play ball at Mesa next year, and he is a very, very big loss for the Cardinals. You also have slot back and linebacker Cash Randall, who is headed to Dickinson State next year, and he was another key piece of the Cardinal offense with his 726 yards and 8 touchdowns on the ground on an absolutely ridiculous 15 yards per carry. He was a workhorse for the Cardinals, though, because he also had 2 receiving touchdowns, and then on defense he added 7 tackles for loss and 2 sacks. He is another big loss here for Elizabeth. Another guy that the Cardinals won't have next year, we got the defensive back / wide receiver Malachi Marisol, who is the Cardinals' leading receiver and one of their key defensive backs. He racked up 2 picks and 3 receiving touchdowns in 2023. Next here, we got the tackle / defensive tackle Riken Angle, who was an absolute dog in the trenches for Elizabeth. The all-PMC tackle was a massive reason why Coop Connolly and Cash Randall were able to run the ball so well. Angle won't be easy to replace on the offensive or defensive line. And then, of course, we've got the cornerback Dyson Lindsay, who was a lockdown DB for the Cardinals with a team-leading 4 interceptions. He is yet another player in the secondary that will be sorely missed. And then our last departure that I want to talk about here, we got the QB Gavin Garcia, who didn't throw the ball much, but his 10 touchdowns on the ground made it tough for teams to focus in on Cash Randall and Coop Connolly, and that allowed them to have such successful seasons. QBs are never easy to replace, so this could definitely be an issue for the Cardinals coming into next season. Now I just want to talk about some key playmakers here for Elizabeth. Our first one, of course, we got to talk about the incoming senior. He is a guard and defensive end, Caden Long, who had a huge 2023 campaign and was honored as an all-PMC guard for his effort in making Elizabeth a top offense last season. He put in some work on defense as well, with a team-leading 11 tackles for loss and 4 sacks. Long returning could mean that Elizabeth will have yet another season as one of the top teams in 2A, because this dude is just that impactful for this team. Another player that this team has returning is the senior middle linebacker Wes No, who balled out in 2023, leading one of the top defenses in the state in tackles, and then he also racked up 11 tackles for loss on top of that. He is a hard-hitting middle linebacker that strikes fear in any opposing offense he faces. Then I also want to talk about a guy that could make a much bigger impact here as a senior. We got the tackle / defensive end Drake Brinkworth, who is a 6'7", 225-pound potential beast for the Cardinals heading into this next season. He didn't see a ton of consistent snaps in 2023, but that could definitely change with the departure of Riken Angle. Brinkworth could be due for a monster senior season as the starting defensive end and offensive tackle. Next year, we got the incoming junior running back / linebacker Tristan McCray, who is set to be put in the Cooper Connolly role as the Cardinals' lead running back and inside linebacker for this coming season. He saw limited snaps on both sides of the ball last year, but his 9 yards per carry on 17 carries is a good sign of things to come. Another incoming junior here, we got the outside linebacker and running back Albert Blanchard, who is another player like McCray and Brinkworth that is set to take on a much bigger role for the Cardinals for this coming season. At 6'1", Blanchard is an exciting option to have on both offense and defense. Then the last guy I want to mention here, we got the incoming junior cornerback Jaden Francis, who is a starting defensive back as a sophomore, and he already has a lot of varsity experience to his name. He could step up as the team's top player in the secondary as a junior. Now for my 2024 prediction for the Elizabeth Cardinals, I think they have a pretty favorable schedule for the 2024 season, and I absolutely expect them to be back in the playoffs. They have enough talent on the offensive line with guys like Caden Long, Levi Lawrence, and Drake Brinkworth to continue to have a very good run game, and that is their bread and butter, folks. And I think they will be a very, very tough team to beat, and I expect them to continue to beat teams that they're supposed to beat. I would be lying, though, if I said that their many graduating playmakers from 2023 wasn't concerning in the long run, though. Losing your two leading offensive and defensive forces in Cash Randall and Cooper Connolly, plus an all-PMC tackle in Riken Engel, and a leading receiver and defensive back in Malachi Marisol is absolutely devastating, to say the least. With that all being said, though, taking a look at this schedule, I see a ton of winnable games here for the Cardinals. They should make light work of Battle Mountain and Sierra to start off the year, but I have them losing the game at the Classical Academy in Week 4. I have them winning the next 5 games, though, against Weld Central, Pagosa Springs, Strasburg, Bennett, and Englewood. And then I have them taking the loss against Kent Denver for the second year in a row in the final game of the regular season for the East League Championship. That gives the Cardinals a 7-2 regular season record and 4-1 league record for my final prediction. I give the Cardinals a window of wins of 6-8 because I think they could realistically compete in any of the games. And I'm also considering those games against the Classical Academy and Kent Denver. I just think TCA and Kent Denver have a little more returning talent than the Cardinals do, and I do expect both those squads to be top 2A teams this year, but I do think the Cardinals could have a chance here if that run game is anywhere as good as it was last year. For our next team here, folks, we got the Adams City Eagles out of the 4A North 2 League. The Eagles had a previous record at 1-9, and they were 0-4 in league games. They really struggled last year. They have their head coach, Kevin DeGuero, returning as head coach. And yeah, in 2023, we at the podcast actually had the Eagles getting up to 5 wins total in 2023, and they would most likely be getting 0 league wins. And while that 5-win total prediction didn't go too well, we were correct about the 0 league wins because they were in a pretty tough league there. But yeah, that prediction was obviously quite generous considering how rough of a season Adams City ended up having. That league they were in, like I just said, was just flat out unfair. And I don't really think anyone, including Adams City personnel, expected them to have any sort of chance of competing there. But yeah, this is a team that only scored 2 touchdowns for the entire 2023 season, and they actually had to forfeit their final 2 games of the year due to injuries, and their roster actually steeped below 20 players at one point by the end of the season, and they just really didn't have anyone to rely on offensively, and this made for an extremely poor performance on the season statistically. Some departures for the Eagles. We got the wide receiver / cornerback Ricardo Hernandez. He was the leader in all-purpose yards. He was the number 1 receiver and the team's returner for kickoffs, and he was number 2 on the team in tackles. He is a workhorse that the Eagles won't have back. You also got the outside linebacker / wide receiver, Jasiel Ayala. He was 3rd on the team in tackles and led the team in forced fumbles with 2. And then you got the guard / defensive tackle, Christopher Gonzalez, who was a starter in both the offensive and defensive line. Some key playmakers that Adams City has coming back. Starting off here, we got the incoming senior offensive lineman / middle linebacker, Michael Victoria. He is 5'5", 230 pounds. He led the team in tackles and tackles for loss. He had 4 of those. He started on the offensive line, and he is probably the most impactful player on this Eagles squad as he plays on both sides of the ball. You also got the junior QB and safety, Isaiah Ortega, who was 6th on the team in tackles. He had an interception on defense, but he had a woeful touchdown-interception ratio of 0-10, a 31% completion rate, and a very rough QB rating as well. he could potentially see some improvement in his second year as a starter at QB. You also have the junior running back / defensive end, Nick Rennie. He led the team in carries and was top 3 on the team in tackles for loss. Another guy, you got a running back and inside linebacker, Jaime Ramirez. He led the team in rush yards. He had a forced fumble on defense, and he was top 5 on the team in tackles. Yeah, definitely expect a bigger season from him as he has a more mature team around him and already a year of experience starting on both sides of the ball going into his sophomore season. Then our last player here, we got the linebacker Carlos Moreno, who could definitely have a bigger impact on the team here. He was 4th on the team in tackles last year. For my 2024 prediction here for the Adams City Eagles, despite having a much more favorable league schedule this season, I think that Adams City will have yet another season well below the 500 mark. I would be flat out lying if I said that I expect a team that scored only 2 touchdowns the entire year before to make a big improvement to somewhat compete this year. The truth is that Coach DeGuero and the rest of the Eagles staff have a steep uphill battle ahead of them with a schedule I could realistically see them maybe getting 2 wins out of. This season ultimately comes down to whether or not Nick Rennie, Jaime Ramirez, and Isaiah Ortega are ready to take a big step offensively and lead this team in a positive direction. This was a young, injured team last year, and I definitely do expect them to make some improvements with a much more expansive and experienced roster. They also play in a more favorable league in the North 2 League, so that is a huge plus for them. With that all being said, though, I give Adams City a window of wins of 0-2, but my final prediction is them going 0-10. They could potentially squeeze out a win over either Skyline or Gateway if things are going their way, but that is a big if, folks. Moving on now, our next team here out of the 4A I-25 League, we got the Gateway Olympians. Last year, Gateway was 3-7 with a 3-3 league record. They had some dominating wins over Thornton and Hinckley, plus a close win over Palmer in the second to last week of the season. They've got a new head coach this year. We got Rashad Mason, who is taking over the program, and he is also the head baseball coach and head strength and conditioning coach at Gateway. He previously played football for the University of North Carolina Tar Heels. In 2023, the Olympians actually kind of struggled a bit. Our podcast prediction for the Olympians last year was for them to get 1-2 wins, and they actually barely exceeded that with a 3-7 record. Niall Sorrell carried an overall lackluster offense that didn't do well against contending teams. 5 out of their 7 losses were blowouts, and 2 out of their 3 wins were to some of the worst programs in the state for 2023. Some key departures here for Gateway. The first one, of course, we got to talk about the QB defensive back, Niall Sorrell. He is leaving, and he just flat out dominated on the ground and led the team with over 1,000 yards rushing to go with 13 touchdowns, while also contributing the second most tackles on the team with 46, alongside 4 tackles for loss, 2 forced fumbles, and an interception. He wasn't great passing the ball with only 2 touchdowns and 5 picks there, but he will just be so hard to replace due to his offensive production and defensive ability. Another guy that Gateway will be missing is the wide receiver safety, Andre Romaine, who was by far the team's leading receiver, and he was a solid contributor on defense as well. Next here we got linebacker fullback Keandre Meadows, who was a top defensive contributor with a team-leading 59 tackles alongside 6 tackles for loss. He won't be easy to replace as the heart of this Gateway defense. Then we got to talk about wide receiver defensive back Oriel Bailey, who is a 6'6 defensive back who led the team with 4 picks in his senior season. He is going to be hard to replace with that kind of production and size. Next here we got the linebacker wide receiver Maximus Matthews, who was a problem in the pass game, getting 2 interceptions on the season while being 3rd on the team in receiving as well. Our last player here, folks, for the departures, we got the offensive lineman and defensive end Brian Gardea, who was a big part of the Olympians' defense, getting 6 tackles for loss while also being a key contributor on the offensive line that allowed Niall Sorrell to rush for over 1,000 yards. And that does it here for the key departures. Let's go ahead and talk about some key playmakers heading into this 2024 season here for the Gateway Olympians. Our first player, we got the incoming senior offensive lineman and defensive lineman, AJ Sosif, who should be the best player on this entire Gateway roster. The 6'3", 260-pound lineman racked up 7 tackles for loss, 2 forced fumbles, and the 3rd most tackles on the team. He will be the leader of this defense and offensive line in 2024, and he is a potential watch list player for our all-PMC teams. Next year, we got another senior, the middle linebacker and running back Michael Washington, who is a solid running back, and he will need to take a big step next year for the Olympians. He also added 2 sacks and 4 tackles for loss on defense. He is more of a downhill runner, so hopefully he comes into this season with improved agility to get some extra yards, because I really think the Olympians are going to need it. Next year, we got another senior linebacker / tight end, Devin Washington, standing at 6'2", around 200 pounds. He didn't rack up a lot of solo tackles, so he can make a much bigger impact if he can step up in that aspect for his senior season. Our last player here returning for the Gateway Olympians, it is another senior defensive back, Devin Vaden, who is a starting DB for this Olympian squad in 2023, and he looks to hopefully fill the void that Oriole Bailey is leaving. At nearly 6 feet tall, Vaden is a potential problem for opposing QBs. Now let's talk about my prediction here for this 2024 season for Gateway. Gateway struggled pretty badly in 2023 despite having a senior-heavy class. This is concerning going into 2024, especially considering that the QB position is a massive question mark. On top of that fact, I am not sure if Michael Washington is quite ready to carry this offense without a solid option at QB. They have taken a big swing, though, with Rashad Mason stepping in as head coach, and hopefully that is a sign of good things to come. But I just think that the Olympians are a year or 2 away before we start to see some real positive changes happen for this squad. The thing is, though, when I look at this schedule, I see a few winnable games here for Gateway. Realistically, I could see Gateway winning the Adams City and Greeley West games. And then, honestly, there are quite a few toss-up games that could go either way after that. It really just boils down to who they have at quarterback and if that player is able to at least use their legs to make plays. I give Gateway a window of wins of 1 to 4, with my official prediction being that they will go 2-8 on the season, with wins over Greeley West and Adams City. Staying in the 4A I-25 League, we got the Thornton Trojans. Last year, the Trojans went 1-9 with a 1-5 record in league games. They had a 7-6 win over Hinckley with a point differential of 126.4 compared to 351 points against in 2023. Head coach Tate Drain is returning as head coach of the Trojans. And let's go ahead and look at their 2023 season and if our prediction was right or wrong. The official podcast prediction for Thornton was for them to go 3-7 with a range of wins of 1 to 4. So they did fall in that window of wins, but they ended up with only 1 win against Hinckley, who was one of the more woeful teams here in 2023. They also had a 65-45 shootout against Palmer and a couple close losses against Aurora Central and North Glen, but everything else was pretty much a blowout. They gave up a ton of points, and their loss of tacklers from the 2022 season proved to make a huge difference. Let's go ahead and talk about some departures here for Thornton. Our first one here, we got the running back, defensive end, David Williams, who was the team's entire offense with over 1,100 yards and 7 touchdowns on the ground. Plus, he also added 3 sacks and 5 tackles for loss on defense. That kind of production is just going to be so hard for the Trojans to try and replace. And then we also got Josiah Rodriguez, who is the team's leading receiver, and he also racked up the 3rd most tackles on the team. He is another key piece of the offense and defense that graduated. Then our last key departure here, we got the defensive end and running back, Andrew Gomez, who had 3 forced fumbles and a sack on defense. And then he also added over 300 yards and 3 touchdowns on the ground. Some key playmakers here returning here for Thornton. Our first one, we got the senior middle linebacker guard, Demetrius Cavett, who led the team with over 100 tackles and 6 tackles for loss, along with 2 sacks. He will definitely be the leader of this Trojan defense once again, and I think it is very nice that he is coming back here for the Trojans. That is huge. He is due for a massive senior season. And then we got the senior QB/wide receiver, Jose Paredes. Injuries last season and weak production at QB has Paredes moving to wide receiver for his senior season. This is a very interesting switch this late into his high school career, but it could work out. Another returner here, we got the incoming junior QB, Rudy Martinez, who will be officially taking the helm under center this year for the Trojans. He performed decently well in the games he played last season, and I expect him to take a decent leap this year into a respectable high school QB for his junior season. Next player here, we got a senior safety/wide receiver, Aiden Martinez, who was 2nd on the team in tackles. He was 2nd on the team in sacks, 2nd in receiving yards, and 1st on the team in interceptions. He is a major contributor for the Trojans and could potentially form a decent wide receiver core next to Jose Paredes. Aiden Martinez's production on both sides of the ball will be key to the success of the Trojans going into next year. Our next player here, we got a senior outside linebacker, Josh Rodriguez, who is a solid option at outside linebacker despite his size. He had 2 tackles for loss and was 4th on the team in tackles last year. Our last player here we're going to talk about, we got another incoming senior. He is on the offensive and defensive line, Ethan Osuna, who is a key piece of the Trojan offensive line and defensive line as well. He will be a much needed player for this team on both sides of the ball. Now let's go ahead and get into this prediction here for the upcoming season. I think the fact of the matter is that Thornton has a ton of returning talent on defense as well as offense, which is exciting. The biggest question mark, honestly, is running back after the loss of David Williams. 1,100 yards is a tough void to fill, but I think with the Trojans committed to Rudy Martinez at QB and Jose Paredes moving to receiver next to Aiden Martinez, they could make some fireworks through the air on offense, in my opinion. Martinez is going to have to step up his game big time on the ground with how much the Trojans run the option, but I think that is very doable for the junior quarterback to accomplish. The returning talent on defense, as well as the favorable schedule in the I-25 League, has me thinking that the Trojans can definitely improve on their 2023 season. My official prediction is that Thornton will go 3-7 with a window of wins of 1-4. I could see them winning the Skyview games, the Gateway game, and the North Glen games realistically, with a chance at winning a couple others, depending how that offense is flowing and if they have a respectable ground game. And again, that is a big if. Moving on now, we are staying in the 4A I-25 League, folks. We got the Grand Junction Tigers. Last year, the Tigers finished with a 2-8 record, and they were 1-3 in league games. They had a point differential of 174.4 versus 319 points against. Head coach Landon McKee is entering his third year as head coach of the Grand Junction Tigers. And let's go ahead and talk about how this 2023 season went and if our podcast prediction was right. And it turns out that Simon absolutely nailed this prediction here for the Tigers, saying that they would lose their first 3 games of the year and win up to 2 games on the season. And that is exactly what happened. The Tigers actually got a shocking 43-35 win over Bear Creek last season. And that is a game where their QB, Will Applegate, had definitely the game of the year. He had 5 touchdowns on offense and 2 sacks on defense. And then the Tigers also beat Mountain Range as well. They beat them down pretty bad, 28-7. There were a few close games and a few blowouts, and to be honest, this was a decent improvement from the 2022 season, at least offensively, with them able to somewhat stay in games in that tough league that they were in last year. We only got a couple key departures here for the Tigers, the first one being the wide receiver, defensive back Tanner Rohrig, who was first on the team in receptions and second in receiving yards, while also being third on the team in tackles. And then you got the defensive lineman, Jaden Ritchie. He led the team in tackles for loss, and his departure leaves a big hole on the defensive line. Now let's go ahead and talk about some key playmakers here for Grand Junction. The first one being, of course, we got to talk about the QB linebacker, incoming senior Will Applegate, who is a 6'4", 240-pound beast and the team's leading tackler. He is a nightmare matchup for opposing offenses just off his size and instincts alone. He is also going into his third year as starter at QB, and to be honest, there hasn't been a ton of improvement there, with his stats in his sophomore and junior seasons being basically identical in both rushing and passing. He is the team's leader on the offense and defense, so this is going to be a big-time senior season for Will Applegate. Our next player here, we got an incoming junior outside linebacker and tight end Ryan Mulvey, who forms a lethal linebacker duo with Will Applegate. He is 6'1", around 200 pounds, and was second on the team in tackles and first on the team in interceptions. He didn't see much action in the pass game in 2023 on offense, but that could definitely change here in his junior season. Another player here, we got the senior wide receiver, defensive back Mason Anderson, who was the team's leading receiver and should see an increase in yardage for his senior season because, like I said, I do expect Will Applegate to make some improvements in that aspect of his game. Next player here, we got a running back, linebacker Austin Music, who completes this team's linebacker core as a top 4 tackler on the team. He is a bit undersized, but his speed is what makes him a solid option at linebacker. And then our last player here, we got a senior running back, defensive back, Noah Watkins, who struggled a bit protecting the ball last year with quite a few fumbles, to say the least. I won't say how much, but he has somewhere between 4.5 to 4.55 speed and is a good option in the pass game as well. He has great agility on top of that, so I expect him to have a big-time, much improved senior season. So let's go ahead and get into this 2024 prediction here for the Grand Junction Tigers. I think with the Tigers returning their leaders in every statistical category, I think it is fair to say that we can expect a big-time improvement from their 2023 season. You throw in the fact that they have moved to the I-25 League, and there is even potential for them to make the playoffs. The problem, however, is that the Tigers have a very tough schedule to start the season, with a home opener against Rifle to start the year, who is fresh off a trip to the 2A championship, and then they have to win the crown back from Grand Junction Central, followed by 3 straight away games against Denver North, Fruita Monument, and Durango, who are all pretty established squads. Realistically, though, I could see the Tigers winning against Rifle and then finally getting the crown back from Grand Junction Central, because that game is at home, and then I have them falling to Denver North, Fruita Monument, and Durango in those 3 away games. It is league games from there, and I have them winning at home against Gateway and winning at Thornton, followed by a game against Centaurus at home that could potentially decide who wins the I-25 League. My final prediction is that Grand Junction finishes with a 5-5 overall record. I give them a generous window of wins of 4-6 because I really expect them to play well in that I-25 League with potential to win that league and make the playoffs. It is really their size on the offensive and defensive line that concerns me the most here for this Tiger squad, but the massive amount of returning talent that they have makes me think that they can improve greatly from their 2023 season. And I also want to add in the fact that they have a much tougher schedule compared to the rest of the I-25 League, so they will be battle-tested heading into those league games, so they could definitely potentially win that league depending on how things shake out. For our next team here, we are staying in the 4A I-25 League, folks. We got the Centaurus Warriors, who are fresh off an 8-2 regular season record and an I-25 League championship with a 6-0 league record. They had 370 points for versus 220 points against, which was by far the best point differential in that league, and they were a playoff team also. Head coach Aaron Carlson is set to step in as head coach of the Warriors. He was previously head coach at Estes Park, which is a 1A squad for the last 4 seasons, and Carlson also coached at Valor as an offensive assistant, mostly on the offensive line. He ran a very pass-heavy offense in 1A, which is not easy to do, and I think that is a very exciting prospect here for the Warriors because they are already a pass-heavy team. So let's go ahead and talk about this successful 2023 season and our prediction for them. We at the podcast were proven wrong as we had them hovering around the 500 mark for the 2023 season, with the Warriors faring well against their weaker schedule with an 8-2 record in the regular season and an absolute domination of the I-25 League to become league champs. Their closest game in league games was a 41-21 dub over Widefield, who is a solid squad. Chance Wood, their QB, made some massive improvements and dominated in his senior season with a 24-3 touchdown to interception ratio while also throwing over 2,000 yards. 3 different receivers got over 500 yards for this dominant Warriors offense, as this team really outshined expectations, to say the least. There are quite a few key departures here for Centaurus. The first one, of course, being the QB, Chance Wood, who was the catalyst for this lethal passing attack. He was statistically one of the best QBs in all of 4A, if not the state. So yeah, Wood's departure is a massive loss here for the Warriors. And then you got defensive tackle / guard Xavier Bradford Valentine, who was the team's leading tackler by a big margin. And he also got double-digit tackles for loss with 10 on the season. He will not be easy to replace on the offensive or defensive line. Then we got safety and linebacker Alexander Wold, who led the team with 4 picks, and he also logged 3 tackles for loss last season. In an already weak secondary, Wold's departure is a big one for Centaurus. And then you got on the defensive line Jafar Zima, who was a crucial piece of this defensive line alongside Bradford Valentine. He was second on the team in tackles and second in tackles for loss with 9. And then we got another key piece of the offense departing, Ben Mishke, the running back, who punched in 10 touchdowns and nearly 1,000 yards on the ground last season. He was a very underrated piece of that dominant 2023 offense. Wide receiver Jack Perena was one of the 3 500-yard receivers for the Warriors that is departing. Luckily, they still have 2 coming back. Then our last key departure here for Centaurus, we got on the offensive and defensive line Renzo Waschek. He is yet another leader of this offensive and defensive line that is departing. His work in the trenches and 7 tackles for loss will be dearly missed for this team. Now, with that out of the way, let's go ahead and talk about some key playmakers that will be contributing to this 2024 Centaurus squad. The first one being the senior wide receiver / defensive back, Travis Main. He dominated in his junior season with over 600 yards, 10 touchdowns, and nearly 50 receptions, and all of these stats, folks, led the team. He will be a key piece in Coach Aaron Carlson's pass-heavy offense. And then we got another senior wide receiver / defensive back, Gage Mutz, who was second on the team in yards and touchdowns. And you should expect a big senior season out of him with his big-time yards after the catch ability. And then we got another senior, this time a running back, Adisu McCormick, who will be stepping in as the team's lead rusher for this senior season. He got 500 yards and 6 touchdowns on nearly 6 yards per carry as a junior. So I expect McCormick to step up big time here for the Warriors. Another senior here, we got the linebacker Carson Seidel, who is a big part of the Centaurus defense here in 2023. He was top 4 in tackles and tackles for loss here for the Warriors. And then we got another senior on the defense, another linebacker here. Middle linebacker Will Pauletto was another key piece for the defense. Him and Seidel is a big-time linebacker tandem that is returning for Centaurus. At 6'1", hovering around 200 pounds, Pauletto is a tough matchup for opposing offenses. And then we got a sophomore here, the guard / defensive tackle Xander Valentine Bradford is coming in for his first year of varsity action as a sophomore this coming season. At 6 foot and over 200 pounds, he brings some much-needed size to a team that is losing a lot of their main talent on the offensive and defensive line. And then, folks, we got the junior defensive back Nick Perena, who is a top 5 tackler as a sophomore for the Warriors, and he will be a key piece of this defense once again in 2024. He is due for a big-time junior season. With that all being said, let's go ahead and get into this prediction here for this coming season. It is hard to get too excited about a team that is losing as much talent as Centaurus is losing from their 2023 league championship season. Just for a recap, the Warriors will be missing their 2,000-yard and 3-year starter QB, a 10-touchdown, 900-yard running back, their top 2 leading tacklers, their best defensive back, and much of their offensive and defensive line, all to graduation. This 2024 season, we will be seeing a few familiar faces and, of course, some brand new ones, including the head coach. Head coach Aaron Carlson, like I said before, he installed maybe the most potent passing attack in all of 1A for the last 4 years at Estes Park. And folks, let's just say it is not easy to pass the ball as much as Estes Park did at that level. This is an exciting fact for the future of Centaurus football, and I am just pumped to see what Coach Carlson brings to the reigning I-25 league champs. And then for the 2024 season schedule, Centaurus starts off with a tough one at Denver North, who is also losing a ton of talent from the previous season. And then from there, it is all games that could lean either way. I think the biggest question mark for the Warriors is the QB spot, with them losing Chance Wood. But if Coach Carlson and company is able to find a QB that can function in that high-volume passing attack, then it could be a repeat I-25 championship for the Warriors. For my prediction, I have the Warriors going 2-3 in non-league games with losses to Mountain Range, Monarch, and Denver North. And then I have them going 4-1 once they get to I-25 games, with a loss to Grand Junction at Grand Junction for their only loss in league play. I have their record at 6-4, and I give them a window of wins to be 5-7, with their big question mark at the quarterback position and many departures on the offensive and defensive line being my biggest reasons why they won't dominate as much in 2024. Moving on now, we are moving over to the 4A North 2 League. We got another Grand Junction team here with the Grand Junction Central Warriors. The Warriors had a record of 5-5 last year, and they were 2-2 in league games with 235 points for versus 315 points against. Former Rifle head coach Ryan Whittington is going into his second year as head coach of the Warriors. And let's go ahead and talk about how their 2023 season went and if our prediction was right. And yeah, we were spot on for the Central's 2023 season, as we had them squeaking into playoffs with a win range of up to 5 wins, and that is what they ended up getting. They were able to score a solid amount of points and stay decently close against Durango and Loveland, which ultimately helped them get into playoffs. They won the games that they were expected to win, with a surprise or two thrown in there, that 3-0 win over Skyline specifically. Let's go ahead and get into some departures here for the Warriors. The first one being the wide receiver, defensive back Cam Redding, who racked up over 700 yards receiving, along with over 50 receptions and 5 touchdowns. But he wasn't done there, as he led the team in interceptions and was a top 3 tackler on defense. He was by far the team's most productive player, and his departure spells trouble for the Warriors, especially on the offensive side of the ball. And then we got middle linebacker David Gonzalez, who just graduated. He was the team's leading tackler and won't be returning here. Another linebacker that won't be coming back, we got Dakota Cowden, who was another key linebacker on this squad and was second on the team in tackles. So that is your top 3 tacklers and your team's leading receiver not returning, which is just not good at all. And then next here we got the QB Kane Thornton, who rushed for over 500 yards and 8 touchdowns, with some okay passing numbers, with just about 1,500 yards through the air, with a 10 touchdown to 10 interception ratio. Not amazing numbers through the air, but he was a dual threat, so his impact goes beyond those passing stats. He had 18 total touchdowns, and that won't be easy to replace. And then we got the defensive end, Parker Hale, who led the team with 4 sacks, and he leaves a big hole in that defensive line with his departure. And then we got on the offensive and defensive line, Ryan Lombardi, who was a key piece of the trenches on both sides for the Warriors. And then another piece on the defensive line, we got Gabe Gray, who racked up 2 sacks and adds to this massive amount of defensive line talent that is leaving the team due to graduation. Now our last departure here that I want to highlight, we got the defensive back Tristan Dean, who was one of the top DBs for the Warriors, and his production is going to be greatly missed for the next season coming up. With that out of the way, let's go ahead and talk about some key playmakers here for Grand Junction Central. The first one being, of course, the sophomore running back Torrance Scott, who is definitely a player to keep your eye out for, as the incoming sophomore was one of the most impactful freshmen in the state last year with over 500 yards rushing on over 100 carries. He will be massive for this Warriors offense next year as they will be starting a new QB, so his production while the new QB figures things out will be absolutely crucial. Another player, we got the offensive lineman Chris Long, who is a big-time returning player for the Warriors. His combination of strength and speed has proven to be crucial in the run game for this team, and I really loved watching his tape for sure. Next here, we got the junior wide receiver slash QB Asher Carter, who got a few snaps at QB last year, but was actually the team's second leading receiver, while Kane Thornton was the team's starting QB last year. Carter is expected to make the move over to quarterback for the 2024 season, and the 6-foot speedster should fit in quite nicely with this scheme. He averaged over 8 yards per carry on 24 carries last year, so I expect his impact on the ground to be felt right away. Next here, we got the senior wide receiver defensive back, Dominic Colissimo. He is expected to step in as the team's leading receiver in his senior season. He is a big target at 6'2" and should have some good chemistry with Asher Carter already. Next here, we got the junior linebacker, Logan Knight. He is a 5'11", 200-pound linebacker, and I expect him to take a big step forward here in 2024 to lead this defense. And lastly, in the key playmakers section of this preview for Grand Junction, we got the junior offensive tackle, Victor Martinez, who is another returning lineman for the Warriors. He saw a lot of meaningful snaps as a sophomore, and his 6'3", 270-pound frame makes him a scary matchup for opposing defensive lines. Now, with the departures and key playmakers out of the way, it is now time to try and predict how this season will go for Grand Junction Central. And let's just say this is not an easy schedule for the Warriors. They have games at Montrose, at Broomfield, and at Riverdale Ridge. Plus, they have a tough away game against a hungry Grand Junction team that is returning a ton of talent from the year before. I think this ultimately spells trouble for the Warriors, considering the fact that they lost 8 out of their 10 top tacklers, their 700-yard receiver and top DB, as well as their starting QB from 2023. I think they are probably a year away from being a playoff team again, because by the 2025 season, it will be Torrance Scott's junior year, and Asher Carter and Victor Martinez will both be seniors with plenty of varsity experience to their names. I have them losing all 3 of the games against Montrose, Riverdale Ridge, and Broomfield, and then from there I have the Warriors beating Palisade, Skyline, Adams City, and Eagle Valley. And then I have them back in the losing column against Grand Junction. I am not sure who their 10th game is against since it isn't listed on Max Preps. So my final prediction for the Warriors for the 2024 season will be a 4-6 record with a window of wins of 3 to 5. I don't see them making the playoffs this year, but if they can somehow make those road games close against Broomfield and Riverdale Ridge, then maybe, just maybe, we will see Grand Junction Central in the playoffs again. Next team here, we got the Highlands Ranch Falcons of the 4A South Metro League. Last year, the Falcons went 1-9 with an 0-5 league record as a 5A team last year, but they will be making a much-needed move down to 4A this year as they try and rebuild this team. They had an 150 points for versus 396 points against score ratio last year, and their head coach, Jason Shoemaker, is entering his 4th season as head coach of the Falcons. But let's go ahead and talk about this 2023 season and if our prediction was correct. And our prediction for Highlands Ranch for 2023 was 0 wins with a window of wins to be 0 to 2, and that held true. They blew out Smoky Hill 41-0, and then they didn't even come close in any of their other games besides a surprising 20-17 loss against Rock Canyon. Not much to say here besides the move down to 4A was just much needed for this struggling program. For departures, you got the defensive back Eric Schnittker, who led the team in tackles. He won't be returning. Then you got the wide receiver Jack Kearns, who led the team in receptions and yards with 57 and 569 respectively. And then he racked up 3 touchdowns through the air as well. That kind of production at receiver is going to be tough to try and replace, especially in an offense that passes the ball as much as they do. Then you got the cornerback Braden Adams, who had a very solid 4 interceptions for the Falcons as a senior, and he leaves a big hole in this secondary with his departure. And our last key departure here, we got the linebacker Nick Newman, who had over 70 tackles and 2 tackles for loss, and he was another big part of this defense. Some key playmakers here for Highlands Ranch. We got the senior QB Crew Gehrig, who is set to have a big-time senior season after his high-volume junior season with 2,200 yards on 338 attempts as a junior. His 12-11 touchdown to interception ratio isn't too exciting, but like I said, I expect a much more refined senior season as they move down to 4A. Next year, we got the senior offensive tackle Brooks Hamlet, who is entering his senior season as a 6'6", 215-pound offensive tackle, according to Huddle. You would love for him to put on a little more weight at that position, but that height at 6'6" is definitely eye-opening. Next year, we got the senior running back / middle linebacker Luke Backen. He is a 6-foot running back that led the team in yards and carries as a junior, but his main impact is as a middle linebacker, where he racked up nearly 100 tackles and 2 tackles for loss last year. He is due for a big senior season as the leader of that defense. Next here, we got the senior wide receiver Jaden Puhia. He was another 500-yard receiver for the Falcons in 2023, and he is expected to step in as that number 1 receiver for Crew Gehrig in 2024, where he could definitely see up to 600 yards and more, which is pretty exciting for him and this offense. So let's go ahead and talk about this 2024 prediction. The Falcons start off their 2024 campaign with some pretty favorable games against Chaparral, Gateway, Aurora Central, and Kennedy. It becomes a much different story once they get into league games, however, as that South Metro League is absolutely treacherous. They will have to face off against Heritage, Golden, Dakota Ridge, and Ponderosa all in a row to end the season, and those are all potential playoff teams. I think Crew Gehrig is due to take the next step forward at quarterback and get up to 20 touchdowns this season, especially with Jaden Puhia returning at wideout. I think the Falcons can win the games against Gateway, Aurora Central, and Kennedy for sure, so that's 3 wins right there. And then I think the Chaparral, Thomas Jefferson, and Bear Creek games are toss-ups, so I'll give them 1 win out of those 3. I then have them losing the final 4 games of the season to Dakota Ridge, Ponderosa, Golden, and Heritage for a final record prediction of 4-6 on the season with a window of wins of 3-6. I say 6 because they could definitely realistically win any of those games against Chaparral, Thomas Jefferson, and Bear Creek with how much talent Bear Creek and Thomas Jefferson lost from 2023. And you throw in the fact that they have a QB in Crew Gehrig and a wide receiver in Jaden Puhia, who are set to have massive senior seasons, especially with that move down to 4A. I really think that those two are battle-tested, and they could really see a big-time increase in production here for the Falcons. Moving on now, let's go ahead and stay in the South Metro League here in 4A. Let's talk about the Golden Demons. Last year, the Demons finished with an 8-2 regular season record with a 3-1 record in league games. They put up 341 points versus 203 points against. And they got head coach Matt McDougall, who is entering his third year as head coach of the Demons. Golden blew out all of their expectations out of the water in 2023 with their 8-win season. We had their window of wins at 4-6 due to their many departing playmakers from the 2022 season, but they just straight up reloaded and dominated last season with several big-time wins. They beat down Ponderosa, Denver South, Bear Creek, and Stanley Lake, while just barely losing to Dakota Ridge for that league championship. And yeah, but they made it to the second round of the playoffs and lost a tough one to Heritage, who is now in their league, which is pretty interesting there. But let's go ahead and talk about some departures here for the Demons. Running back Luke Chevalier, he racked up 944 yards and 11 touchdowns on over 8 yards per carry, which is just insane. That type of production is going to be very tough to try and replicate with another player. And then, of course, you got the 6'5", 215-pound wide receiver, Trey Abrams. He, alongside Luke Chevalier, led this Demon offense all season long. He is another guy that won't be easy to replace at all. Speaking of not being easy to replace, we got the offensive tackle and flat-out beast, Montre Strickland. He is a 6'5" UNC commit, that's Northern Colorado, and he will be dearly missed in the trenches for Golden. He was recently honored as one of our top 55 seniors, which I believe he was in the top 10. Next year, we got another top 55 senior here, Mason Labrie, who is fantastic in the secondary for Golden as he heads to Bentley University next year. Another key piece of this defense that won't be returning, we got Brown Chesser, who was the 2023 leading tackler for the Demons. And then another linebacker that won't be returning next year, we got Jonathan Wheeler, who was another piece of this dominant linebacker core, who won't be returning in 2024. He was second on the team in tackles. And then we got center and defensive end Andrew Wall, who was a big reason why Luke Chevalier was able to rush for 8 yards per carry. He's another piece of this offensive line that won't be coming back, and that hurts quite a bit. Next year we got a linebacker, Cole Sojgren, I don't know how you pronounce that. But anyway, at 215 pounds, he was a top 3 tackler for this Golden defense. So that is your top 3 tacklers, your 2 key pieces on the offensive line, and another key piece being the cornerback not returning, plus the star receiver and running back for this team in Luke Chevalier and Trey Abrams. These are some massive departures for Golden and could potentially spell trouble here for the Demons. But let's go ahead and talk about some key playmakers returning here for Golden. We got the senior QB, Kalen Hufford. He had 21 total touchdowns in his first year as a starter for the Demons in 2023. I expect his 15-12 touchdown interception ratio and sub 50% completion percentage to go up in his senior season, and that's despite losing some talent on the offensive line and in the wide receiver room. Next year, we got another senior defensive lineman, this time Noah Limbach. He is entering his third year as a key piece of Golden's defense. And then another senior defensive lineman, Wyatt Holtman, is coming back. He was the leader of all non-seniors in tackles last season, and I expect for him to make a big step next season next to Noah Limbach on the line. Let's go ahead and talk about the senior running back Trevin Edwards, who is expected to step in as the number 1 running back for the Demons entering his senior season. He has big shoes to fill with Luke Chevalier graduating, but his nearly 8 yards per carry on 48 carries last season is a sign of good things to come here for the Demons. And our last key playmaker I want to highlight, we got the junior wide receiver Ethan Bonafide. Yeah, we're going to go with Bonafide. He was second on the team in receptions and yards for the Demons. He is not nearly as big of a target as Trey Abrams, but he could end up being the number one receiver in 2024 as he has shown some great skills on contested catches according to his huddle highlights. Let's go ahead and get into this prediction now for the Golden Demons. I think that this is a very favorable schedule to start out this coming season where they could end up going 5-0 heading into league play. I see them winning all the games against Brighton, Thomas Jefferson, Pooter, and Lakewood. Plus, on top of that, I think they could realistically beat that Florida team in week 0. I wouldn't 100% count on it since it'll be an away game, but they definitely could find a way to win that one. I'll give the edge to New Smyrna Beach in that game, though, for a 4-1 record heading into league play. I believe that Golden will win the revenge game from last year's playoffs at Heritage for their first league game, and then I have them beating down Bear Creek, and then finally I have them losing 2 in a row to Ponderosa and Dakota Ridge before ending the regular season with a big-time win over Highlands Ranch. That makes my prediction for the Golden Demons to be a 7-3 record with a 3-2 record in league games. I have their window of wins to be 6-9 with the way their schedule is laid out. I think that head coach Matt McDougall has given me absolutely no reason to doubt this team, and I believe that the Demons can reload despite their several key departures, so I definitely see Golden as a playoff team next year. It is going to be a much tougher league this year. I think having to play Heritage, Ponderosa, and Dakota Ridge is quite tough to end the year, but being battle tested heading into playoffs is never a bad thing. We're going to go ahead and stay in the 4A South Metro League and talk about the Ponderosa Mustangs. Last year, the Mustangs finished with a 7-3 regular season record and 4-0 in league games to be league champs. They had 364 points for versus 229 points against, joining a much more difficult league in 2024 compared to that Southeast Metro League that they dominated in. Head coach Jaron Cohen is returning as head coach of the Mustangs for the 2024 season, which is great. And yeah, let's go ahead and talk about this prediction and recap that we had for their previous season, 2023. We had their window of wins for the 2023 season to be 7-10 wins, and they ended up with 7. Their starting QB, Marcus Price, had some nagging injuries throughout the season and wasn't able to go 100%, actually missing some games there. So the Mustangs had to improvise a bit, and the team had a really rough midseason stretch because of that. The Mustangs still finished as league champs and had a bye in the first round of the playoffs before losing to Windsor in the second round. There's a few key departures here that we gotta highlight for the Mustangs. The first one being the linebacker Blake Branham, who was the heart of this Mustangs defense, and he will be sorely missed to say the least. The Fort Lewis commit and all PMC member racked up an absurd 127 tackles and 16 tackles for loss as a senior. And then the thunder to his lightning, we got the edge rusher Weston Hofschneider, who was another absolute beast on this Ponderosa defense. The Wyoming wrestling commit put up nearly 100 tackles while also having a ridiculous 23 tackles for loss and 7 sacks. Hofschneider and Branham won't be easy to replace whatsoever, as those two just had absolutely ridiculous production last year. And then speaking of ridiculous production, we got to talk about the running back Sean Davis, who had over 1,000 yards and 13 touchdowns on 172 carries, giving him a very nice 6.3 yards per carry. The Adams State commit left it all on the field for his senior season, and he will also be greatly missed. But then, of course, we got the Northern Colorado commit and top 55 senior wide receiver safety Carson Keach, who was third on the team in reception and yards and receiving touchdowns with 400 yards and 5 touchdowns through the air. Plus, he was fifth on the team in tackles, and he added 2 interceptions as well. Keach was a beast for this team on both sides of the ball, and he's another guy that just will be so hard to replace. Then we got another wide receiver safety, Dylan Carstetter, who balled out as a senior with 508 yards and 6 touchdowns on a team-leading 36 catches. He also added 3 tackles for loss and 2 picks on defense. Then we got the cornerback, Caden Bile was another productive defensive back with 4 tackles for loss as a cornerback, which is pretty cool, while also adding 2 interceptions. And that about does it here for the key departures. Let's go ahead and move into some key playmakers who we expect to make a big-time impact on this 2024 Ponderosa squad. Starting off here, we got the senior wide receiver, Max Mervin, who is probably the most crucial piece of this Mustang squad coming back. He is a jack of all trades, as he was probably the only player in the state in 2023 to have over 500 yards receiving, over 400 yards rushing, and over 300 yards passing, as he was put in at QB with Marcus Price being injured there mid-season. He is due to be the undisputed top receiver on this team in 2024 and should once again put up some monstrous numbers. He often lines up as the Z receiver due to his speed, but he could definitely see some time as the X in 2024. Next up here, we got the senior defensive end, Ryan Tongren, who is a 6'5" beast off the edge for the Mustangs. He was second team all-conference as an edge rusher, and he will be a crucial piece of this 2024 team since they will be without Weston Hofschneider. 2024 could most definitely be his breakout campaign. Another senior returning, we got the QB Marcus Price, who had some nagging injuries in 2023, as I have mentioned a couple times before. He had an entire offseason to work out and get healthy, though, so I expect Price to make a big-time comeback here for this coming season, especially with Max Mervin as his number 1 target. Another player we got returning, we got the junior offensive linebacker, Caden Miller, who was extremely productive as the team's 3rd leading tackler as a sophomore in 2023. He is a bit undersized, but his huddle film shows a player with insane speed off the edge, and this kid just flat out plays violent and aggressive. He might be the leader of this Ponderosa defense as a junior in 2024, so keep an eye out for him for sure. I also definitely expect him to fill out and get a little closer to 190 pounds towards his senior season. But like I said, I expect some monstrous numbers out of Miller here for this 2024 season. Next year, we got the senior running back linebacker, Ethan Pekarik. He is set to replace Sean Davis as the Mustangs' leading running back in 2024. His 440 yards and 6 touchdowns on nearly 8 yards per carry is a very good sign for this Ponderosa offense. He is a type of back that welcomes contact and just fights through it for more yards. Next year, we got the senior linebacker, Riker Thompson, who had a solid 2023 campaign with 4 tackles for loss while being 4th on the team in tackles. He and Caden Miller form a lethal linebacker tandem. Next year, we got the senior edge rusher, Bryson Tidwell. He is another player that could take a big step forward in 2024 as a starting edge rusher. At 6'2", he and Ryan Tongren form a tall and scary defensive line for the Mustangs. And that does it here for the key playmakers on the Mustangs. I think you've got a lot of players that could make a very, very good team here despite entering a much tougher league. And, I don't expect them to take that far of a step back running the ball. I really think that Ethan Pekarik could step in and be maybe not as productive as Sean Davis, but pretty dang close. I think it's 440 yards and 6 touchdowns on 8 yards per carry. That's pretty exciting, like I said before. But let's go ahead and get into this 2024 prediction here for Ponderosa. And I really like what Ponderosa has here. Jaron Cohen has coached this team to consistent regular season success, and I expect much of the same here for this upcoming season. The biggest concern is the loss of the two top defensive players, as well as a couple key pieces in the secondary from 2023, and that is big news, but I think they have the pieces returning to keep them as a top team in 4A. The Mustangs unfortunately have to play the 2022 state champions Roosevelt and the 2023 state runner-up Palmer Ridge in two of their first three games to start the year, but I think they will win at least one of those games. Combine that with wins over Rampart, Falcon, Chaparral to give them a 4-1 non-league record. And then the league schedule is where things get interesting, though, as we have Ponderosa, Heritage, Dakota Ridge, and Golden, who are all competitive and pretty evenly matched teams where really any of those teams can win against each other on any given day. I honestly think that Ponderosa is going to be the top dog out of these teams in 2024, so I think they will ultimately go 4-1 in league games with a loss to Heritage or Dakota Ridge, and that will give them the league championship in the South Metro League. With that being said, I have the Ponderosa Mustangs going 8-2 with a 4-1 league record in 2024 with a window of wins of 6-9. We are now getting into some 5A teams here, starting off hot with a playoff team last year with the Castleview SaberCats of the 5A South Metro League. Last year, the SaberCats went 7-3 with a 2-3 league record. They had 316 points for versus 183 points against. Head coach Aaron Hainke is heading into his fourth season as head coach of the SaberCats. And let's go ahead and see how we did for our 2023 prediction. The SaberCats definitely exceeded expectations as they had a predicted window of wins of 4-6, and they reached that just in their non-league games with a 5-0 record there before finishing the season 7-3 overall. They absolutely annihilated their non-league opponents with a 146-31 point differential there, and that includes a dominating win over Legend in a game I saw with my own eyes. They struggled in a tough league, though, and saw their production on both sides of the ball come back down to earth with a 2-3 league record there. And they still had a top defense in all of 5A and a pretty efficient offense as well. They've got some key departures here, though, starting off with the biggest one. We got the top 55 senior and Nebraska commit, the edge rusher Jordan Ochoa. This one hurts real bad for the SaberCats. Like I said, Ochoa is heading to Nebraska next year, and he is an all-PMC edge rusher that made Castleview one of the most feared defenses in the state. He had a massive senior season with 8.5 sacks, 11.5 tackles for loss, and 30 hurries. That kind of production and impact is nearly impossible to replace. Another massive departure here at the heart of the defense. You got the middle linebacker, Jonathan Nieto Villa, who was the other key piece of the dominant 2023 Castleview defense. With 114 tackles, 6 tackles for loss, and 4 sacks last year, he is yet another guy whose impact is going to be just so hard to replace. And then, of course, we got the guard Ryder Smith, who is also out of here due to graduation. He is headed to Bates College and was one of the most impactful parts of the Castleview offensive line. This is definitely a big loss here for the SaberCats. And then you got the free safety Ben Knox, who held down the secondary with 4 interceptions in his senior season. He held down that secondary and is definitely going to be missed. Also on the defense, you got the outside linebacker Logan Weir, who is another solid piece of the defense with 6 tackles for loss and 3 sacks as a senior. Staying on the defense, you got Owen McPherson, the D lineman, was a 6'2" beast and was a big part of that defensive front with his 3 sacks and 3 tackles for loss. On the offensive side of the ball, you got the running back Ethan Gonzalez, who was an efficient running back for Castleview. He was a key part of this Castleview offense that made very few mistakes. You also have in the secondary Weston Vildabil, the defensive back here. He is headed to Jamestown next year, and him and Ben Knox were definitely key pieces of that defense and just the defense in general. So that's quite a few defensive pieces that this team will be missing with the losses of Ochoa, Jonathan Nieto Villa, Ben Knox, and Vildabil, along with Owen McPherson and Logan Weir. Definitely not going to be easy to replace there. Now let's go ahead and talk about some key playmakers here. We got quite a few actually, but we're going to go ahead and start off with the senior running back, outside linebacker Aaron Perry, who is expected to be the leader of the defense and is also expected to step up as the team's top running back on top of that. 12 tackles for loss and 4 forced fumbles last year, and he could potentially be an all-PMC linebacker depending on how that senior season goes. At 6'1", 200 pounds, he is an intriguing option at running back as well. And then you got the senior QB, Derek Gordon, who is as efficient as they come. 21 touchdowns to only 5 interceptions and nearly 1,900 yards on 73% completion as a junior. I am expecting Gordon to make a big step next year as a potential all-PMC QB and potentially reach 30 touchdowns if he is able to sling it downfield more than he was allowed to in his junior season. Gordon spread the ball around everywhere too, with 5 different receivers getting over 20 receptions. And then you got another potential all-PMC guy here, the senior cornerback Daryl Ishman. He is a cornerback who stands at 6'2", 185, without a doubt one of the more exciting prospects on this team and in the state in general at that cornerback position. He had 4 picks as a junior in 2023. Definitely got to keep an eye on him. Then on the offensive side of the ball here, we got the wide receiver Sam Harry, who is yet another potential all-PMC playmaker on this team. At 6'4", he already had a big-time junior season with over 50 receptions and nearly 700 yards. Sam Harry is due for a major senior season, and that could definitely put the state on notice, especially at that size at 6'4". Staying on the offensive side of the ball, we got to talk about the senior guard, Evan Gaston, who has some insane huddle highlights. He just lays dudes out and plays with so much aggression. He will definitely be a massive part of this offense, and I'm very excited to see what he does this season. Now we got on the defensive side of the ball, we got the senior inside linebacker Jackson Brenner, who is second on the team in tackles last year with 91 as a junior, and then he added 7 tackles for loss and 5 sacks as well. He could potentially partially heal that wound of losing Jonathan Nieto Villa next season. Next here, we got the senior edge rusher, Jacob McConnell, who is due for a monster senior season. He had 6 sacks and 9 tackles for loss as a junior, and he will be that lead option at edge here for the SaberCats. Staying on defense, we got the middle linebacker, Griffin Harrison. He is a 6'2", 215-pound beast that will definitely play a big role on this defense in 2024. 56 tackles, 3 tackles for loss, and 2 sacks as a junior, and that is expected to go way, way up as the main middle linebacker next year for the SaberCats. And then, of course, folks, we got the senior 2025 tight end. I did not forget about him. We got Jackson Blanchard, who was second on the team in receiving yards, and he had 6 touchdowns as a junior. Definitely one of the top tight end prospects in the state, standing at 6'4", 225 pounds. He, alongside Sam Harry, with Derek Gordon throwing to them, is going to be so much fun to watch, and I expect all three of them to ball out here going into next season. So let's talk about it. Let's talk about this 2024 prediction. And it might be crazy to say this, especially with them losing Jordan Ochoa and Jonathan Nieto-Villa, but I think the Castleview SaberCats are set to be a better team in 2024 than they were last year. Just looking at this insane amount of talent that they have coming back, they could be a serious threat here next season. You got Derek Gordon back, plus a very good offensive line, and his two top targets in Jackson Blanchard and Sam Harry, and that's not even talking about the defense. The defense has players that are ready to step up, and I mean very ready to step up, while also having leaders from last year like Daryl Ishman, Aaron Perry, and Jacob McConnell, who are due to have incredible senior seasons. Head coach Eric Hankey is a great coach on top of all this talent he has on the roster, and I definitely trust him to take advantage of that and get this team to where they need to be. Looking at the schedule, I have Castleview starting off the season 4-0 with wins over Mullen, Chaparral, Horizon, and Douglas County. And then I have Legend getting revenge at home over the SaberCats to close out their non-league games. So that gives them a 4-1 non-league record to start off the year. Heading into league games here, I've got Castleview finally beating Valor and then rolling over Fruita Monument, Rock Canyon, and Thunder Ridge before losing once again to Mountain Vista in the final regular season game of the year. And that makes my final prediction for the SaberCats for them to go 8-2 in the regular season with a 4-1 league record. I give them a window of wins of 6 to 9 games because that Valor game could go either way, and that goes the same with the Mountain Vista and Legend games. I am really excited to watch this Castleview team, especially after looking at all of the talent they've got coming for this 2024 season, and I think they've got even more talent coming after that, so a lot of good things are happening for that squad over there. Next here, we got the Chaparral Wolverines of the 5A Southern League. Last year, the Wolverines had a record of 0-10 and 0-6 in league with a woeful 58 points for versus 436 points against. Head coach Jeff Ketron has been the head coach since 2018, and he is returning here in 2024. Just a little recap here for the 2023 season and our prediction. We actually had Shap going 0-10, and that is exactly what happened. They had a very tough schedule and were already coming off of a 1-9 season in 2022. So 0-10 sadly was not surprising whatsoever. Let's talk about some departures here for the Wolverines. The first one being the strong safety Quinn Biffinger. He saw a lot of action in the secondary, and this led to him leading the team in tackles for loss, and interceptions. Definitely a big loss here for the Wolverines as he was their leader on that side of the ball. You also have the outside linebacker Hunter Martin, who is second on the team in tackles, and he played a big role for this defense as a senior. Then we got a couple of offensive tackles here. First, we got Seth Olson, who is a Southern Virginia commit, and he is a very big boy at 6'7", 260 pounds. He will be dearly missed on a team that really needs the offensive line talent. And then you got the other tackle, Cody Almendinger. He was a starting tackle for Shap, and he also leaves a hole on that O-line with his departure. And that about does it here for the departures. Let's go ahead and talk about some key playmakers here for Chaparral heading into the 2024 season. Starting off here, we got a senior middle linebacker, Angus Garvey, who should be one of the leaders on this defense here in 2024. Then you got the senior running back / outside linebacker, Noah Segal. He didn't do much on the ground as the team's leading running back with only 322 yards on 100 attempts, but he was a solid linebacker with 3 tackles for loss on the year. I expect him to definitely improve, especially on offense, but also improve on defense for this upcoming senior season for him. Next year, we got the senior edge rusher, Brett Hale. He is maybe the most legit college prospect on this roster at 6'2", 220 pounds, with the team leading 3 sacks as a junior. He is going to be another one of the leaders of this defense for the upcoming season. Staying on the defensive side of the ball, we got the senior defensive tackle, Brett Duffendack. He is returning with 2 sacks as a junior and should be able to expand on those stats here as a senior. And in the last part of the key playmakers, I want to talk about the senior wide receiver, Wilkins Persicina. He was the team's leading receiver last season, and I expect much of the same here in 2024. So let's go ahead real quick and talk about how I think the season will go here for Chaparral in 2024. And yeah, this is yet another season for the Wolverines where they have a very tough schedule, and that is coming off of a lackluster season the year before. It is hard to have much hope for them when they have a league with teams like Regis, Legend, Pine Creek, and Fountain, Fort Carson. Their only true winnable games this season is against Highlands Ranch, but even that one I would still give the edge to Highlands Ranch. They still don't seem to know what they're doing at the quarterback position as well, which is also always a bad sign. And on top of that, they don't have a good ground game at all with a below average offensive line. With that all being said, ultimately I think this is yet another 0-10 season here for the Wolverines, and I give them a window of wins of 0-2. I think maybe they should consider taking a page out of Highland Ranch's book and just go down to 4A, because just being in 5A right now, especially in the league that they're in, I just don't see much success for them now or in the future. But, you know, I'm always open to be proven wrong, and I wish them nothing but the best. Staying in the 5A Southern League, we got the Douglas County Huskies. They had a previous record last year of 4-6 with a 2-3 league record. They had 225 points for versus 288 points against. And they have head coach Eric Rice returning as head coach of the Huskies here in 2024. In the 2023 season, we had the Huskies go 3-7 for our prediction in the regular season with a window of wins of 1-4, and they were right in that window with 4 wins on the season. The Huskies reached the playoffs on the backs of guys like Jake Stonebreaker and Charlie Reed, but they did not necessarily exceed any expectations. But with that being said, let's go ahead and talk about some key departures here for Douglas County. Starting off, we got an absolutely devastating one, the linebacker running back, Jake Stonebreaker. He is as devastating of a loss that you could possibly have for the Huskies. The 2A Kansas State commit was top 20 in our PMC senior rankings as both a running back and as a linebacker, which is just flat out insane. And then, of course, you got the inside offensive lineman, Charlie Reed, who is yet another top 20 PMC ranked senior who is headed to Southern Utah next year. These are DC's 2 best players in 2023, and they won't be back coming into next season, and that just hurts. On the defensive side of the ball, you got Corey Sanchez. He was second on the team in tackles and led the team with 12 tackles for loss. Him and Stonebreaker made for a great linebacker core. And then staying on defense here, you got the edge, Darius Cofield Washington, and his 9 tackle for loss will be greatly missed for this Huskies defense. Also on the defensive line, you got Ben Jennings at over 300 pounds. He was a force of nature inside. He is another piece of the front 7 that won't be returning. And then you got the tight end defensive end Tate Peterson, who led the team in receiving touchdowns as a senior. And then our last departure here, you got the wide receiver Jordan Wilhelm, and you also got the wide receiver Reed McConnell. They are a pair of 300-yard receivers who won't be back in 2024. So just looking at these departures, you got your top 2 linebackers, you got 3 guys on the defensive line that won't be coming back, and then you have 2 300-yard receivers who also won't be returning. That is a tough blow here for the Huskies, especially after coming off of a 4-6 season. But let's go ahead and look at some key playmakers here that will be here for the upcoming season. Starting off, we got the junior wide receiver Nolan Case, who led the team in receiving yards and receptions as a sophomore, which is crazy. I expect a big-time junior season out of Case here, assuming he has a somewhat decent QB throwing to him. On the defensive side of the ball, you got the senior outside linebacker Caden Absher, who had an absolutely phenomenal junior season with 99 tackles and 6 tackles for loss. And if his mile-high prep performance in the spring is any indicator of what his senior season is going to look like, then buckle up, folks. This kid is the real deal, and all of us here at the podcast are expecting a big-time 2024 season out of him. Next, we got a guy who didn't get many varsity snaps last year, but I definitely want to talk about him because he is a potential watch list player. We got the junior QB, Aiden Parsons. He is a 6'5" incoming junior who balled out on JV last year and saw a few snaps on varsity, going 4 for 6 for 56 yards and a touchdown. He might be the answer at QB here for the Huskies, but we will have to see what he does at the varsity level as a starter before that is decided. I know Simon got to see him in the 7vs7 tournament at Mullen, and he seemed to be very impressed. So, I'm pretty excited about what Parsons can do on this team here heading into next season. Next, moving over to the defensive side of the ball, we got Garrett Griffin. He had a nice junior season, finishing 3rd on the team in tackles with 5 tackles for loss as well. Douglas County didn't do too well getting to the QB in 2023, so maybe, just maybe, Griffin can change that around here next season. Staying on the defense, you got the senior linebacker James Sinote. He is one of the guys that will be taking on a bigger role here with the amount of depth the Huskies lost in the front 7 from the previous season. He was a top 4 tackler on the team as a junior. Now on the offensive line, you got a senior Kaylor Welch. He will be back on the offensive line and will need to step up big time with the loss of Charlie Reed. Going back over to the defensive side of the ball, we got an outside linebacker here, Cameron Caillou. He was another top 5 tackler on this team returning, and he will get plenty of action here in 2024. So just looking at this, you got Aiden Parsons stepping in as QB, and I think he could definitely be a step up from what they had last year. And, with him throwing to Nolan Case, that could be an exciting duo. And then, of course, you got Caden Absher, who I already know is going to dominate here in his senior season. And, you got some nice returning pieces here. I don't expect anything too crazy out of them as far as record goes, but let's go ahead and talk about that. Let's get into this prediction here for the 2024 season. And, as I mentioned before, the Huskies are losing 2 of their best players from the 2023 season, where they only won 4 games. The good thing for them, though, is that they have a very solid amount of returning talent on defense, with 5 of their top 6 tacklers coming back, while also adding a new QB on offense in Aiden Parsons that could potentially do some very good things for them. Combine that with the fact that they're returning their top receiver, Nolan Case, and maybe, just maybe, the Huskies could squeak into the playoffs here in 2024. They have a couple of favorable non-league games before they have a pretty insane stretch against a ton of probable playoff teams in league. I have the Huskies beating Brighton and Smoky Hill to start the year before falling to Rock Canyon and Castleview in consecutive weeks to start the year off 2-2. After that, I unfortunately have them losing to Chatfield, Fountain, Fort Carson, Pine Creek, Regis, and Legend in consecutive weeks before finally winning that last game of the season over Chaparral. That stretch there between the Chatfield and Legend games is just insane. I feel bad for them, but if they can make some of those games close, especially those games against like Pine Creek and maybe Fountain, Fort Carson, maybe Chatfield, if they can make those games close, then that would bode very well for their RPI rankings and a potential playoff spot. But my final prediction here for the DC Huskies is for them to go 3-7 with a 1-4 league record in 2024. I think those 3 wins over Smoky, Brighton, Chaparral are basically guarantees, but I'm still going to give the Huskies a window of wins of 1-4 because we just don't know what this offense is going to look like without Jake Stonebreaker and Charlie Reed. We are staying in the 5A Southern League. Let's go ahead and talk about an absolute beast of a team from 2023. We got the Legend Titans. The Titans went 7-3 last year and 3-2 in the league with a 414 points for to 171 points against. We got head coach Monty Thielen. He is returning as the head coach of the Titans here in 2024. But let's go ahead and talk about how that 2023 season went and if our prediction was correct. Simon completely flipped the script on them and had Legend going 10-0 last year with a window of wins of 7-10, and the Titans were right in that window with 7 wins on the season. They had one of the most complete teams in the state in 2023, with their only real weaknesses being their depth at receiver and their questions at quarterback. But they had a big-time win over Valor in round 2 of the playoffs before falling to the eventual state champs Columbine in the quarterfinals. So, I would say it was a pretty overall successful season for the Titans. Didn't end the way they wanted, but what are you going to do when you face the eventual state champs in the quarterfinals? But let's go ahead and move into the departures part of this preview. They've got quite a few here graduating. Starting off, we got the leader of the defense, linebacker Nate Sandy. He had 156 tackles and 10 tackles for loss as a senior. The CSU Pueblo commit is going to be extremely tough to replace here. And then also, you got the other piece of the linebacker tandem, Elijah Frakes Belair. He is another piece of that elite 2023 linebacker core that has graduated. He was second on the team in tackles, and he also racked up 8 tackles for loss. Staying on the defense here, you got the edge rusher Jamar Yancey. He had a big-time senior season with a team-leading 4 sacks and 8 tackles for loss. Then still on the defense, you got the linebacker Lucas Bettendord and edge rusher Billy McGuckin, who were both key pieces of the defense, with Bettendorf getting 6 tackles for loss and 3 sacks, and McGuckin getting 5 tackles for loss and 2 sacks. Those two were very big for this defense. On the offensive side of the ball, though, you got Alex Martinez, the running back. He was the Thunder, and Jaden Lawrence was the Lightning for the Titans in 2023. Martinez was always reliable, especially in short yardage situations. He will be at Mesa for lacrosse next year. Then you got the offensive tackle Logan White. He's headed to Nebraska Kearney next year, and his run blocking ability is something that the Titans will definitely have a hard time replacing. Then staying on the offensive line, Cruz Garcia, who was a big reason why Legend was so effective running the ball, and this Minot State commit will be sorely missed on the offensive line. Lastly, staying on the offensive side of the ball here, we got the wide receiver Jeff Baca, who racked up over 400 yards, and his departure leaves an already thin wide receiver depth chart in rough shape. Just looking at these departures, you got 2 key offensive linemen, both of them tackles leaving the team, and then of course you got your top 2 linebackers and your top edge rusher that won't be returning here. that is always tough and will be hard to replace. But with that all being said, let's go ahead and talk about some key playmakers here for the Titans. Starting off, of course, we got to talk about the senior running back phenom, Jaden Lawrence, who was the team's leading rusher and receiver in 2023 with over 1,800 total yards and 22 touchdowns as a junior. The All-PMC running back is due for a massive 2024 campaign that could potentially see him back in the conversation for PMC MVP and PMC Offensive Player of the Year. On the defensive side of the ball, you got the senior free safety, Peyton Auckland, who is one of the top safeties in the state, and he will continue to dominate next season. He had over 100 tackles and led the team with 4 interceptions as a junior, and he just got an offer from Mines, and we at the podcast definitely expect those offers to continue to roll in here for Auckland. Staying on the defensive side of the ball here, we got the senior edge rusher, John Niedringhaus. He had a stellar junior season with 10 tackles for loss and 3 sacks, and his 6'3", 215-pound frame makes him a very intriguing prospect, and I expect him to really, really turn it on here in his senior season. You also got the senior safety, Brody Schuss, who balled out in 2023 with 103 tackles, 5 tackles for loss, and 2 picks. Him and Peyton Auckland form a top 3 safety tandem in the entire state, no doubt at all. Now over on offense, a junior running back, Riken Banks, who now has that number 2 running back spot all to himself with Alex Martinez graduating. He was still 3rd on the team in receiving yards as a sophomore, and he also had 6 total touchdowns on the year. Banks should fit in beautifully as the power back in this legend offense, and he will make a top running back tandem with Jaden Lawrence. Over on defense, you got a senior outside linebacker here, Champ Jones. He will be taking on a much bigger role here in 2024 with the departure of most of Legend's main linebackers. He put up 61 tackles and 7 tackles for loss as a junior, and I expect that to go way up here for his senior season. Also on defense, you got another senior defensive back here, Carson Flowers. He had 3 picks as a junior and should have a much more increased role here as a senior. Next year on the offensive line, junior tackle Gage Turnbull, who had an awesome sophomore season. He should be one of the more refined offensive tackle prospects for the 2026 class and is definitely a big weapon here for the 2024 Legend offense. Definitely excited to see what he can do here as a junior. And then, of course, we got to talk about the junior QB, Michael Marcinich, who was the undisputed starter to begin the year, but then for some reason they threw in another QB after Marcinich struggled a bit, which was a bit confusing choice, to be honest. They need to stick with Marcinich here in 2024 and let him grow. He has the best feel for the game and the highest ceiling out of any of their other current QBs. So I think it is crucial that Legend sticks with him here to start off the year. And then our last key playmaker I want to highlight, we got the outside linebacker, Ray Bergner. He is another guy that will definitely see an increased role next season. He had 7 tackles for loss as a junior. But looking at this, I think offensively, you got a lot of returning talent. Jaden Lawrence and Riken Banks as a running back duo. Those two will give you a chance in any game you play, with Michael Marcinich also having a year under his belt starting. That's exciting, man. I think this Legend offense is going to be really scary once again. And then on defense, I think they will be very good again as well, with Peyton Auckland and Brody Schuss coming back as that safety tandem. And then, of course, you got guys like John Niedringhaus, who, like I said before, I really expect him to turn it on here as a senior and put up some really scary numbers as an edge rusher. But with that being said, let's go ahead and talk about it here. Let's get into the 2024 prediction here for the Titans. And like I just said, offensively, the Titans should be as good, if not better, than they were in 2023 for this upcoming season. Jaden Lawrence is, of course, going to ball out, but you also have Reichen Banks stepping up as a perfect complementary piece to Lawrence in this offense. I also expect Michael Marcinich to be the clear-cut starter at QB and make this Titans passing attack more respectable. The line may be a bit weaker, but you still got Gage Turnbull, who's ready to take things up a notch in his junior season. The receiving core is still a big question mark here, to be quite honest, but luckily Reichen Banks and Jaden Lawrence have already proven to be elite options in the pass game to make up for that. And then on defense, Peyton Auckland is going to have an incredible senior season, you already know. And then alongside Brody Schuss, those two will be locking down in the secondary. And like I just said, I also expect John Niedringhaus to emerge as one of the top edge rushers in the state as a senior. But with that all being said, they did lose a lot of talent at linebacker and just in the front seven in general, and they will be relying on a few guys like Champ Jones and Ray Bergner to soothe those losses, which could end up working out pretty well for them. The Titans' 2024 schedule is looking quite brutal, though, with them starting off with a game all the way in Fruita Monument, followed by a game at Grandview and Aurora. I have the Titans winning both of these matchups, though, followed by a close loss to Columbine in their home opener to start off the season 2-1. That game is still winnable, though. I plan on attending that one because I really want to see what both those teams have got. I think that one should be a good one. And, maybe with it being at home, maybe the Titans can come out on top. But either way, it should be a good one. I then have the Titans beating Prairie View and then getting revenge over Castleview to end their non-league schedule with a 4-1 record. And then getting into league games, I have the Titans winning 4 in a row against Pine Creek, Chaparral, Fountain, Fort Carson, and Douglas County before losing the last game of the season to Regis for the Southern League Championship. My final prediction for the Titans is for them to go 8-2 with a window of wins of 6-9, and I feel very strongly about this prediction, especially that window of wins, as long as they can figure out that pass game and make teams respect them through the air. But they've got a few games that could go either way. Like I said, that Columbine game is an interesting one, especially at home. They could definitely come out on top. Columbine is always a tough team to beat, though. Pine Creek lost a lot of talent from the year before, and I mean a lot of talent, so I really expect them to win that one there. Fountain Fort Carson is going to be very tough this year, and I think that will be a close one, and it could go either way. But like I said, I got Legend winning that in my final prediction. So I really think that window of wins of 6-9 games is going to be very accurate, but we'll see. You never know what's going to happen. But feeling good about the Titans heading into 2024 for sure. Now for our last team we're going to talk about here, we got the Regis Jesuit Raiders of the 5A Southern League. Their previous record in 2023 was 6-4 with a 4-1 league record. They had 334 points for versus 233 points against. They've got head coach Danny Phileman, who is back as head coach for the Raiders. For the 2023 prediction, we had a predicted record of 4-6 with a window of wins of 2-6 because we really just weren't 100% sure what to expect with them. But the Raiders obviously exceeded expectations as they finished with a 6-4 record, and head coach Phileman ended up being one of our top 3 finalists for the Coach of the Year for their performance on the season. They beat down Legend and Fountain Fort Carson while narrowly losing games to Arapahoe, Roston Valley, and Pine Creek, who are all top-ranked teams heading into playoffs. So that was a very tough schedule. So to come out 6-4 with all the question marks they had, that was very impressive for Coach Danny Phileman and company. But let's go ahead and talk about some key departures here for the Regis Jesuit Raiders. Starting off here, we got the cornerback Lawson Douglas, who had an awesome senior season, and he ended up on our all-PMC team and our top 55 seniors list. His 4 picks and 6'2" frame will definitely be missed for the Raiders. He is committed to play football at Penn next year. Then you got, of course, linebacker Trevor Nordstrom. He had an unbelievable 2023 campaign with a ridiculous 157 tackles, 18 tackles for loss, 9 sacks, and 2 forced fumbles on his way to our all-PMC team. That kind of production just simply can't be replaced, but he'll be at Mines next year playing baseball. Staying on defense, Cole Canino on the defensive line, who was another baller on this defense with 15 tackles for loss to go with 8.5 sacks. He was one of the leaders of that lethal Regis Raiders pass rush attack that was one of the top in the state. And then, of course, on offense, you got Albert Medina, the running back. He was the heart of this Raiders offense on his way to leading the team in both rush yards and receiving yards. His 18 total touchdowns and over 500 receiving yards were a big reason why Regis was so successful last season. On the offensive line, Dylan Berry, he was a big-time weapon for Regis in the trenches, standing at 6'7", 275 pounds. He will definitely be missed on that O-line. And then our last key departure here, you got the edge rusher Mason Saunders with 3.5 sacks and 5 tackles for loss in only 7 games as a senior. He is another piece of that front seven that recently graduated. But, looking at it, I think most of their key departures are guys on defense. And, of course, Albert Medina. Medina leaves a big hole there on the ground game for the Raiders. And I think that could be an issue for them heading into next season. But then again, they usually find a way to figure that out there. So we will see what happens. Let's go ahead and talk about some key playmakers here going into this next year. Starting off here, we got the freshman quarterback Luke Rubley, who has chosen to play at Regis, and this is big news, folks. This is a kid who has made waves in his youth career and has put the state on notice as a 6'2" rocket arm playmaker with already elite instincts. I mean, the kid already has an offer from Florida State before even taking his first class in high school. He throws with a velocity and precision that is very rarely seen from a freshman, and he is already one of the best QBs in all of Colorado before taking his first snap as a varsity starter. I definitely expect him to start right away here for the Raiders. Next here, you got the senior middle linebacker Kai Shelton, who was second on the team in tackles as a junior, while also adding 9 tackles for loss. He will be at the center of this defense and should be able to help with the loss of Trevor Nordstrom. Staying on defense here, we got the senior edge / tight end Jace Fillman at 6'3", 215 pounds. He was second on the team with 8.5 sacks as a junior. He will be returning as a key piece of one of the top pass rushing teams in the entire state. Next year, tight end linebacker Grayson McPherson. He was a dog for the Raiders with 90 tackles, 7 sacks, and 3 forced fumbles on defense, plus over 200 yards receiving as a tight end. Him and Jace Fillman are going to make a nasty pass rushing tandem that will be a headache for opposing offenses. He will be a top target for Luke Rubley as well in what is expected to be a more high-volume pass attack next season. Next year, we got a sophomore edge rusher, Jackson Roper, who had a productive freshman season here with 3 tackles for loss and 1.5 sacks for the Raiders. With a 6'5", 235-pound frame, Roper is a big-time prospect that colleges need to have on their radars. He will definitely have a much more prominent role for this defense in 2024, and we at the podcast are all keeping our eyes on him to see what he can do. Next year, we got the senior wide receiver Jojo Hernandez, who is second behind Albert Medina in receiving yards and first in receptions with 430 yards and 43 receptions with 5 touchdowns. He will be Luke Rubley's number 1 target, so expect those numbers to go way, way up next year. Next year, we got a senior running back, Garrett Reese, who's expected to step in as the top running back option in this offense for this coming season. It will be tough to reach the heights of Albert Medina, but 350 yards and 6 touchdowns last year means he is ready to step in and take on that heavy workload. And our last key playmaker that I want to highlight here, we got the sophomore edge rusher, Colton Heimlicher, who saw some decent snaps as a freshman with 14 tackles and a sack. He stands at 6'4", 205 pounds, and I think that him and Jackson Roper are bound to form a lethal defensive line together for years to come. That is definitely an exciting fact for the Raiders. We will definitely be saying his name a lot more here in 2024. With that all being said, let's go ahead and talk about my prediction here for the Regis Jesuit Raiders in 2024. I think they definitely will be one of the top teams in the state here next season with their new QB, Luke Rubley, under center, alongside the many playmakers that they have coming back from the 2023 season. Coach Danny Phileman has proven that he can coach his team up no matter who they're playing, and I expect much of the same in this next season as the Raiders have yet another tough schedule ahead of them. They start off the year against Valor, followed by a game against one of the top teams in Arizona in the desert before they come back to Colorado to play the 2023 state runner-up Cherry Creek Bruins at Cherry Creek. So that is 3 away games before they finally have their home opener against Mullen in Week 5 to cap off their non-league schedule. I have the Raiders beating Valor at Valor before losing to Brophy College Prep and Cherry Creek in Weeks 2 and 3. I think both of those, though, are winnable games. I just think there might be a couple struggles here with the new offense with Luke Rubley and a new running back facing off against 2 established teams like Brophy College Prep and Cherry Creek. I just think that they might struggle in those games. But again, those are winnable for them. But like I said, I have them losing both of those. And then they will finish off their non-league schedule by making light work of Mullen and Fossil Ridge to give them a non-league schedule record of 3-2. In league games, I have them ripping through their league with a 5-0 record, beating Shap, Fountain Fort Carson, Douglas County, Pine Creek, and then finishing off with a win over Legend in the final week of the season for the Southern League Championship. This is a very optimistic prediction as I have them going 8-2 with a 5-0 record in league because I really think having Luke Rubley in there at QB with those weapons is going to make Regis extremely hard to beat. I have their window of wins of 6-9 because they've got quite a few games that could go either way, like the Legend and Fountain Fort Carson games, for example. But either way, Regis Raider stock is through the roof right now, and I am going all in. And that about wraps up this episode of the Playmakers Corner podcast, folks. I want to thank you all for listening to this season preview. Make sure to show us some love and give us a follow on any of our social medias so that you never miss a recap, preview, interview, or film breakdown. Once again, this is Gino with the Playmakers Corner podcast checking out, and thank you for listening. Peace out.